Hi there, this is not typical Money Talks. Today I'm going to show you how to replace brake pads and rotors on Volkswagen Jetta. This in particular is 2013 model, it's called Sportwagen, has 2.5 liter engine. And I got an estimation $700 to replace the front brake pads and rotors on this vehicle. Technically, it might have been double if I wanted to replace the rear brakes, but fortunately I just need to do the front. In your lifetime, you'll most likely face this brake maintenance 5 or 6 times. So each time, if you learn, have a skill and able to do it yourself, you can save money and see how much we can save and invest. That's the goal. Let's do it on our own. Let's go. Right, guys, let's look at this rotor and the pads. This is the old one. I took it from the right wheel. This is the pad. The pad has about 5 millimeters left, um, and the rotor looks good to me. Why I even came up with this idea, putting this as an idea to save a little bit of money, because I was told that I need to replace the rotors and the pads, and this job is more expensive than just throwing pads on your car. So I was told that it's a European vehicle, and I was told in 5 places that it needs to be replaced all at once. And it's nice if you have extra money, um, but I've been living in Europe. We don't do it. We usually run 3, 4 pads before we replace rotors. Sometimes we perform some kind of machining on the rotors if we think they have some kind of you know, dips, small dips and scratches. This rotor looks good to me, just eyeball it. But I still decided to replace it to show you the whole process. After all, it wasn't that expensive in the parts. Both rotors cost $50 or $60. So let's do it. Alright guys, this is the right rotor from the right side. Let's measure this. I have a caliper tool. This is a digital one. And the car has 178,000 on it. Alright? Okay. It should be 25 millimeters when they're brand new. As I can see, it's almost 25. I assume I'm not touching that all the way. I see the little hair, maybe 1 millimeter. Um, in my opinion, they're good. I still decided to replace them. I think they could have lasted much longer. But they're not that expensive, around $60 both. And these are made in Germany. All right, let's move on. And what is interesting too, I was told on the phone that it needs to replace the rotors, but nobody really looked at them. Nobody measured them. They just decided that we need to replace them. And these are the tools that you would need to perform the job. Let's briefly look over them and see. As you can see, there are wrenches, ratchets, sandpaper, sockets. We'll just carefully we'll go over them. The one you really want to be maybe curious, this is the fluid extractor. I extracted a little bit fluid. That's a brake fluid from the reservoir. It costs around $10. This one is interesting one. This is actually help us to compress a piston. And when we do that, because when your brakes are worn out, you have to push on the piston, and it's not going to be easy to do with your arms. Most likely impossible. So you need some kind of force, and this tool was little, you see these plates helping you do that. All the plates go for different brakes. I'm just going to be using one of them. You'll see how I did. Okay, this is the torque wrench. You'll need it for lug bolts and other bolts. Pry bar, around $6 or so at Amazon. Breaker bar. You will definitely need one because some bolts are going to be stuck and seized, especially the bracket ones. This is the ratchets, 3/8 short handle, pretty nice ones. And these are gloves. Oh, this is a bungee cord. This is a good one. You really need it to support a caliper because your caliper is gonna be hanging on the tubing brake line. This is mallet and caliper brush. It costs around $10 and wipes. Now let's look at the lubrication. What I have, it's anti-seize, thread lock, and this is the brake lubricant. It says it's silicone based for caliper pins and other parts. It has pretty good reviews, but you can choose whatever brand you like. Those were in the store nearby, and I think they're pretty fine. Let's go over them. This one is multifunctional, silicone based, and I will put it on pads and caliper pins. At least what it says on the instruction, you can do that. It has fine reviews. Alright, the next one is anti-seize. I will put us on Flange Rotor hub. And thread lock, I like to be secure, and it costs a couple bucks. And so let's look at the sockets. First of all, you would need 17 millimeter for wheel lugs. This one is 21 millimeter for bracket that holds caliper, and this guy is 7 millimeter. So they're all metric. It's Allen, and you would need it for caliper pins. And the next little guy sitting over here is T30 Star. You would need this one for a little bolt that holds rotors. And finally, let's look at the parts that we're going to install. This is the rotor, and made in Germany actually, and cost $60. And the first thing you'd like to do is just, before you buying this, measure 7 times the rotor that you already have. You don't want to miss on that. Or you have to return it and they're heavy and you have to pay. Or you install the wrong one, which most likely not going to happen. So it's coated, which is good too. Not that expensive. These are the pads made by Bosch. I like the company. They're okay, they're decent. I will show you one little problem with them later. The car is in parking position, and these two little guys would help me to choke the wheel. So it's prevent the vehicle from rolling, and I'm using them on the right rear wheel, and I'm working on the left front one. Just like so. Before I started jacking this car up, I'd like to show you one interesting thing. Look at over here. There's a little dent, and you can feel it. It's made by manufacturer. It's Volkswagen. So if you have a Volkswagen, you'll see that. I'll try to point you. So there's a little dent in this car. There are 4 of them. Those are indicators where you put your jack stand. And this car has been always servicing in some shops, maybe 10 different shops. And as you can see, the guys bended the plate and didn't use this. I guess they didn't know where the appropriate lifting points. You see it's bended. I don't know if you can see it. I'll try to add some light on. You see this bended plate? Instead of using this double welded plate, they were using this one and bended it. So there's another reason why I'd like to do it myself. Even though I'm not a mechanic, but I trust myself, and I will do my best to do the job. And you'll see that in a second. There you go. This is stand jack. And here is a piece of wood, lifting jack right over here. I'm going to be working on the left wheel, and I'm going to be lifting up just the left wheel off the ground. The cap is already off. This is just a box that'll be sitting somewhere in the garage. And there's a little stool. It actually was pretty handy to rest my caliper on. First of all, I'd like to take this cap off from the brake fluid reservoir. It's hidden over there. It's hard to reach. There's a cap and a sensor attached to it. So first of all, I will deattach this sensor. There you go. This is the cap, and sensor is on the side right there. So why even doing this? The reason is, if you remember that tool that compressing the piston, once we do that, the brake fluid and brake line is going to be raising up in the system, and it might overflow because pads are brand new. They need less room, so the piston needs to be sitting deeper. So I'm going to be using that compression tool, pushing that piston, and the fluid will have less room because the piston is pushed inside. This is a brake fluid extracted from reservoir to prevent overflow. Before lifting this car up, I'd like to break loose those lug bolts, otherwise they'll be just spinning with the wheel.
And this is 17mm socket.
I'm using this piece of wood instead of rubber pad. It's a good idea to use a rubber pad, but I didn't have one and I was short on time, so I'm using this piece of wood. The jack stand is already under the lifting point, and I showed you previously the lifting point. There's a little dent right under it. There's a double plate for this jack stand made by a manufacturer. And the next step is I'm going to be lowering, releasing the pressure like so, very gently, and letting this car land on this jack. And as additional support, once it landed, I will use this lifting jack again. I'm going to be adding a little bit of pressure like so. So it's still sitting on the stand jack, but it's just an extra security step. I'm keeping this lifting jack on. Wheel is off, and you see those lug bolts. They have anti-seize on them, and I think it's too much. I would keep it just a tiny bit, and I will wipe them off a little later. Finally, car is lifted, the wheel is off, and I'm turning my wheel to the left, trying to bring the caliper towards me so it would be easier to work. As you can see, the only one side is lifted. Instead of lifting two wheels, the front wheels, I'm lifting just one for stability. I'm going to be taking the caliper off, and it's held by those two caliper pins. They have a little thread, and they're sitting right inside under that rubber. I shook this car again. I made sure it's stable, and I'm keep working it. It just not on the video. I didn't record that. Also, one important part, when I disassemble something, I'd like to take pictures of it. Okay, I see this 801, ZH, okay, some kind of symbols, and I keep those pictures just in case to make sure if I have any doubt later on down the road, I knew how it was. So I trust myself, but still, I would just take those pictures, and if you do the same, uh, take those pictures. Okay, let's take this caliper caps. This is the top, and this is the bottom. Using a small pry bar, removing this brake clip. The next step is unplugging the sensor. If your car has a sensor, and you can look at the left wheel of your car, make sure you're buying the right brake pads with a sensor. Okay, now you see I had to damage this part because it was just stuck, and the little clip that's in it, it snaps in, and it was impossible to do anything on this. I spent a few minutes on that and pushing it back and forth but it just got stuck. So I had to use pliers and gently, very gently, piece by piece, I was biting that off. So this part is going to be toasted. It's coming from the brake pad. But this part comes from your car, and you don't want to damage this part.
The next thing I'm gonna do, coming back to this pins. So as I said, it's a 7mm, and I'm gonna take them off. There are two of them, one here on top, one on the bottom.
Okay, my Allen is just spinning. It's sitting on the top. The caliper pin is right there. And you see it's spinning, spinning, it's spinning. It's not coming out. The reason is there's no lubrication on that pin, and it just got stuck a little bit. It shouldn't be that bad, and there are two ways to do this. You can apply some force, kind of pushing on the wall, and at the same time pulling it. It's a little bit harder, but it might work. Another way, just using your pry bar. The caliper pin meets the thread. On the little tip of that pin, there's a thread. It meets the bracket thread. And by using the pry bar, it's right here, you can just push it a little bit and it will come out. The top caliper pin is still in. You can see this little shiny pin. I use a pry bar, so it worked pretty well. The next step is adding my bungee cord. This is very handy. It has hooks. They're very soft, and I attach it to this spring. The caliper is very heavy. That's why I want to put this caliper on this stool, and as additional support I'm using bungee cord, because the brake line is very fragile, and we don't want any stress or weight on the brake line. Okay, this is the pin. As you can see, it's little, there's a dirt and some debris, some brake dust or something, so we will have to clean it with sandpaper. And as you can see, there's no any lubrication. The pin is completely dry, and it needs to be lubricated with a silicone paste. So this is another reason why I like to do it myself. Just, I don't want to forget this lubrication. This little hole over here, with a little nut, it helps you to release brake fluid. But I don't want to do it because I already extracted some fluid, as you remember, from a reservoir up there. So I don't want to bleed these brakes since the fluid is already in my fluid extractor, sitting on the table. The next step is taking this caliper off. Both pins are out. Now I'm using this pry bar, and I'm going to be pushing this towards me, and after that up, towards me and up. Let's do that. All right, and going towards me and up. All right, now in my hands, and I'm setting this on this stool. The caliper is sitting on the stool, resting, and I'm going to be adding bungee cord. I'm going to be using this one, has soft hooks. I like this one, and it's stretchy and strong. I don't want to use any sharp hooks and scratching the pinholes, but this one looks pretty good. So there are two hooks and two holes. Let's do that. All right. Now it's sitting pretty good, and I can maneuver it. Still sitting on the box, and I'm maneuvering with the cord. Now, when caliper is sitting, we're going to be taking this pad off. The pad has a clip, and clip is sitting inside a piston. Okay, I'm using my 2 arms. Okay, there you go. You see this one? I'm going to be putting this in the trash. There's a clip. And there's another one, the second one. It's just sitting on this bracket on its own. Okay, now let's look at this again. There's a damaged cord, you see. I already explained why. So I'm going to be testing this. Okay, since I'm replacing pads and rotors, the next step is taking this rotor off. It's held by a little screw in this bracket, and the bracket is held by 2 21mm bolts. The bolts are attached to a knuckle, and they'll be pretty stubborn. Most likely they're seized, and this is when we use our breaker bar. So we'll need to apply some force, but before you do that, be careful. You don't want to break this bolt. I'm not using penetrating oil, but it's a good idea to soak those bolts, spray them, and let them sit for a few minutes because they're stubborn, they're seized, and if your car is rusty, you might have problems. Okay, let's take the top one and the bottom. The bracket has 4 holes, 2 little holes for the caliper pins and 2 big ones for the bolts that we already took off. Okay, now this rotor is held by this little bolt, T30 star. And with this little ratchet, I'm going to take it off. Okay. Now it's still sitting on because it's seized. And we're going to be using mallet, shaking that and tapping. I've seen many times people using hammer and they hit them hard because they're seized. But I'm going to be using this mallet and I want to be gentle as much as possible because I don't want to hit this flange that's behind the rotor. So if you damage this or just scratch it, it will affect your brakes. So be patient.
This is pretty good.
Finally, the rotor is in my hands. It was pretty stubborn. Seems pretty good. So coming back to this point that I didn't hit it hard. It took me extra time because the flange is sitting on. It needs to be as much as possible perfect, and we don't want to bend it, hitting that hard with a hammer. We don't want to scratch it, or it will affect our brakes. It will affect them pretty good. So I'd like to be as much as possible gentle with this. So the next step is cleaning, and I'm going to be cleaning this one, removing all this rust. And I'm not going to be using power tools. I've seen people using power tools and brush, a wire brush. It's okay, but you'll scratch it. And even like 0.5 millimeter scratch will affect your brakes eventually. So I'm using this gentle sandpaper and I'm going to be cleaning this all around, trying to be careful.
Oh, this is the 100 sandpaper.
Now it looks better. It's all shiny. I'm using this sandpaper and gently working all my way around this flange. This is 100 sandpaper and it's pretty gentle. So a tool brush for the big stuff, the caliper and the bracket, and sandpaper for the flange. I'm going to be using this and removing all the parts that's left. I'm making sure that's all that's left is metal. Now it looks even better. I'm about to apply anti-seize on this to prevent this seizing in the future. But before I do it, I'd like to mention one extra step that good automotive technicians would do. It's called hub flange runout measurement. There's a tool for this. It has a needle and a gauge, and you circle that around, making sure your flange is perfect. If If it's not, you might feel some pulsations in your pedal. Your brakes might warn unevenly. But I'm skipping this step, as many people do in many shops. If I experience any problems, I will do that, but I'm not planning on changing my hub. So I'm applying anti-seize using my fingers. There you go. Here it comes, the new rotor. I'm going to spray it with a brake cleaner, like so.
Like so.
I'm adding one lug bolt to hold the heavy rotor and tightening the little bolt that holds the rotor, like so. Now I'm going to take all my bolts and stick them in the bolt holes. I'd like to make sure that the rotor is right and everything is aligned before I move on the work with caliper. It's a little extra step, but it's worth it. I'm putting all of them in, making sure everything is right. Alright, looks good to me. Now I'm going to take them off. The rotor is sitting in place. Now it's time to put this bracket back on, and it is dirty. Let's look at this. There are 4 holes for the caliper pins and the bolts, and you see it's dirty. We're going to use caliper brush and a brake cleaner. You see there's a little debris. I'm going to get rid of it with this brush. These are 2 bolts. They're ready to go. I took them off previously from the bracket. They hold the bracket. They're very important. And I just want to apply a little bit anti-seize on them. As you can see, there's a rust and they were seized. I'm not a big fan of adding too much of anti-seize, but I'll just add a little drop, and after that I'll add thread lock on them. Look at your torque spec. You have to torque these bolts properly, making sure they're holding the bracket right, and it's very important. I put the bracket back on, and I'm about to tighten those bolts and torque them according to the spec. It is 90, so you might have something similar, but look at your specification. And I'm snugging them, tightening them, and now I'm about to apply torque. 1, the bottom, and now the top. 2. Now it's ready to go. Now it's time to apply this compression tool on our piston. This piston is sticking out too much. It will be simply impossible to put your brakes on, so the pads won't fit, and they need more room because they're new, have more surface left on them. So the piston is on the way and needs to be compressed, needs to be pushed inside with this tool. The tool costs $25. You can find cheaper version for $10 or so. Once I'm starting compressing the piston, there's going to be less room for the brake fluid. That's why I extracted a little bit brake fluid previously. But before started compressing, I'd like to clean this piston and the caliper. Let's focus on the piston. You see it's covered by the rubber, and if you roll it, you might see some dust inside. As you can see, there's some brake dust and a little bit of dirt, and you'd like to be very careful digging that dirt out. I'm going to be using my fingers and new gloves to get rid of this dirt. The rubber part can be cracked and lose its functionality if you apply brake cleaner on the rubber. I'm applying brake cleaner only on my wipe and holding the sleeve. Here it comes, the compression tool. I found the appropriate plate. It's rounded plate and it will help me to compress the piston. There's a small magnet. I attach it like so.
So this plate.
And setting this on the caliper. Once the piston is all the way compressed, I'd like to make sure that the rubber sleeve isn't jammed. If it is, I can fix it with my fingers or a screwdriver. Not a sharp one. Gently looking around, making sure the rubber sleeve is sitting in place. Now I'm compressing the piston. It's going in. There's not much resistance. It's moving. At the same time, I'd like to look periodically on the fluid level up here because there's less and less room for the fluid. I don't want any overspill. So it looks okay to me. Coming back and keep going. Almost done. Keep compressing. Check the fluid again. Now it's all the way in. It's completely compressed. Removing the tool. Alright. And look over the sleeve, the rubber sleeve. I haven't jammed it. Looks fine. Just making sure it's all straight and sitting in place. Okay, it looks good to me. Now I'm going to finish cleaning the caliper pins and the caliper itself. I'm using this brush for the caliper. The brush has sharp wires. You don't want to damage rubber sleeve. After cleaning, there's a lubrication step, and it's hard to see, but there's a little dip, one of the pad just sitting there, and it needs to be lubricated with silicone paste. Also, I would like to apply the silicone paste over here on this slot. See this little slot here and here? Two on the top, and there are two on the bottom. I'm going to be using my fingers and lubricating them as well. And they're caliper pins. They're pretty dirty. They need to be cleaned as well. And I will use sandpaper to clean them. The sandpaper is 100 grit brake cleaner, like so. Caliper is clean. Now it's time to put this brake pad in. As a little clip, this part goes right inside the piston and sits there. Before we put it on, we'll put this lubrication over here on this plate. Even though it has a plate that's supposed to prevent squeaking, it's not going to hurt if we add some lubrication over here. I'm going to be using this one. Okay, like so. A little bit here and over here. The lubricant costs $10. It's silicone based. Looks like it's silicone paste. It says it's very good for lubrication and it has good reviews, and we will trust this one. Okay, now I'm adding this lubricant on my finger and going around the piston face, like so. Right there on the surface that meets the brake pad. Okay, now this brake pad going this way, right over here, right inside the piston. There's a little clip. The clip has resistance, and watch out, don't snap your fingers. Okay, doesn't want to go. I need to use my both hands. Pushing that in. You hear a little snap when it's in. Like so. There you go. Okay, and finishing the lubrication over here. I'm adding lubricant on my fingers instead of a little brush. That's easier for me. Lubricating the ears of the pad, like so. Okay. Now it's time to lubricate the slots. That's where those ears go. Okay, which one? Let's start from top right. All right, adding here. The bottom right. Let's dig more for the pad. Lubricate this pad over here. It has 2 ears. Let's add lubricant on one ear and on the other, like so. The extra silicone I'll be wiping off later. And the surface that meets caliper needs to be lubricated right here. One, here too. Okay, looks good to me. There's one ear that's sitting in a dip in the caliper. So I want to show you over here. This guy needs to be lubricated. Okay, looks good to me finally. Okay, it's ready to go. The ears will be inserted into those slots like so. And sitting on its own, and it will be supported by the caliper. Okay, let's change gloves and move on. Finally, adding lubricate on the dip inside the caliper, the small dip. That's where the ear sits. And on the sides. Sides of the caliper will touch the brake pad. Let's lubricate it over here. And the caliper pins. Those two, already cleaned them. I'm going to be using silicone paste on them. And on the thread, I will add this medium strength thread lock. The bottom is already in. I snagged it. And let's work on the top one. Okay, the top one is here. Goes right here. I haven't lubricated it yet. Let's do that. Alright. Adding the thread lock. This is a medium strength. Over here. A little drop. Okay. And a silicone paste over here. Okay. Mash it around. There you go. And sticking that in. The both caliper pins are in. Okay, and I'm making sure it's aligned. There are holes, bolt holes inside the bracket. You remember there are 2 big ones that's holding the bracket itself, and the little ones that's holding the caliper. So okay, let's tighten these pins and try to find the torque spec for those caliper pins. I'm using this little ratchet. Okay, and the bottom one. The thread lock is gonna help a little bit as well. Okay, the final, bottom, top, and the bottom again. Okay, the caps I will put back on later. And look over the caliper, it's all assembled. I'm making sure the brake pads and their ears sitting in slots. Okay, the top one looks fine. It's right there, the bottom one. Okay, there you go. Removing bungee cord. I don't need it anymore. And steering wheel to the right. Back under the hood. We want to close this cap. This is brake fluid reservoir. Make sure your level is okay. If you need to add something, add. I don't need to add anything. So I'm putting this back on. Okay. And there's a sensor. let's snap it back in. Like so. It's a little tight over there. There you go. And here it comes, the clip. The shiny one and the rusty one. So this one, the old one. And I wanted to replace it with a new one, but I was a little concerned because when I was trying to put it on the right wheel before, it's not in this video, it was sitting in place, but it was sticking out and kind of behaved a little bit differently. These clips, they need to be precised, and I guess this time Bosch didn't do their job right. I started comparing them, and I noticed the difference. I don't know if you're able to spot it on camera. I'll try to put them side by side. So this is the new one. This is the old one. Let's look. You see, the shape is a little bit different. For this reason, I'm not going to use the new one. I'm going to be using the old one. And maybe someday I will just order the genuine part from Volkswagen. I'll just replace them. So for this, let's just use the old one because it's sitting better and I have more confidence in this one.
And I push it up. Might slip and actually get your finger flutter, so be careful of this. Tap it in place. Gently tap it in place. It's a little hammer. I am very gentle. I just want to make sure sitting in place. Yeah.
Before I put the wheel back on, I just want to clean it again with a brake cleaner. Let's wipe off whatever is left on the rotor. There might be some dust, oil from my fingers, some extra silicone, and anti-seize. Anti-seize is a little bit sticking out. Just wiping that all around. Over here. Okay, looks good. And now lug bolts. They have a little bit anti-seize in them. Someone left there. I will be wiping them off. I don't need this much. And I will add medium strength thread lock. All bolts are in. Let's jack up this car to remove the jack stand under it. So let's do this. Jacking this up a little more, tiny bit more. Okay, I remove it. Lowering this car down, like so. I'm not letting it all the way down. The tire is sitting on the ground, but the car is still up. The reason is when I'm torquing this bolt, I don't want extra weight sitting on the wheel, so I'd like to be going towards the hub as much as possible smoothly. Once I torque them, I will lower this car completely. I look at the car manual and it says 88 foot-pound. That's the torque spec. I'm going to use my torque wrench to apply this torque on the bolts. Moving in a star pattern, one by one. You might think I will just tighten them pretty hard and that will be secure. But you don't want to over tighten these bolts. because you apply too much pressure on the hub and it will affect your brakes and the wheels. It just needs to be right. You can be too tight and you can be just loose. It needs to be precisely right, and find your torque spec and apply the appropriate torque on the bolts. Okay, I'm almost done. I hear all those clicks and ready to move on. Let's bring this car down all the way to the ground by releasing pressure on the lifting jack. As you can see, I'm not using the rubber pad. I just have a piece of wood. I was short on time. I hope you have one. That was just a solution for me. If you like this video and if you found this helpful, please subscribe and I will create more content for you guys. The car is on the ground, but there's one important step left. I'm gonna get in and I will push 7 to 10 times on the brake pedal. As you remember, I compressed the pistons, and the pistons are responsible for forcing the brake pads to make contact with the brake rotor to bring your vehicle to a stop. So there's a gap between the pads and the pistons. And to remove this gap, I want to get rid of this by pushing on the pedal 7 to 10 times. I just finished driving this car. I added 10 miles on it, and it felt pretty good. I've been driving up hills, down hills on an empty road to be safe. The brakes work properly, and it will take few hundred miles until my brake pads reach their full capacity. If you look at your brake pad shape, you might notice that the longer you drive, the more surface will touch a rotor. So that's why they're a little bit expanding in few hundred miles until they reach their full capacity. And if you found this video helpful and more interesting than others, feel free to subscribe. I'll create more content for you. Thanks for watching.